Okay, so here we go. Welcome everybody, and thank you as always for taking some time to chat with the COVES community of practice. We continue to believe that this is one of our greatest strengths, all of you, all of us, working together on this rather than doing it by ourselves, and having better thoughts when we surround ourselves with great thinkers. To get us started today, as we look to the future, Alex and I came up with a few poll questions, and we'll see how this goes. So first, we'd like to ask all of you, what is your most likely time frame for reopening? So for many of you, you may know this concretely. You may be open already. You may have a date set. For some of you, you may be guessing, but hopefully we've given enough options. Keep in mind that this survey was not pilot tested, nor did we have it validated by a panel of experts. We just came up with it about 20 minutes ago. So, and if you can, definitely weigh in. There's more than 30 people on the call, and I see, yeah, 26 people have responded, and it's okay if you don't get to. And it's okay if there are more than one of you at the same institution. Just dive right in there. So if you're just joining us, we're trying to figure out when people think they're reopening. And I'll leave this up for another 25, 30 seconds. All right, more than 90% have voted, so I am going to go ahead and end the poll now, unless last minute voters. Okay, we're good. So it looks to me like many of us, most of us, more than half, are set to open, in the next month or two. But that, if we cumulatively think about people who are already open or thinking about opening this month, that's about 3/4. So this is, COVES coming back to life and supporting institutions where they are is a real thing that we're working on really hard, as you've, if you've been a part of the last few conversations. So this is really helpful. Let's see. Keeping in line with the polls. Okay, so some of us are open, some of us are going to open real soon, some of us are thinking of opening kind of soon. When we begin collecting data again, whatever that means to you, where you are, you think the survey should be shorter, same, longer? And if you're in a noisy space and you're not muted, you may wish to mute yourself. And we can always unmute as conversation comes up. Okay, I've got about 30 people voted. Anyone else going to vote? I'm going to close it. Last chance. All right, this is a close one. Looks like many of us think it should be shorter, have fewer questions than before. Many of us think it should be about the same length, and I'm glad to see that at least one person thinks it could have more questions than before. We've had really interesting conversations around this in smaller circles, so this will contextualize how we think about what's to come. So I'm now going to read somewhat of a prepared statement, if I can find it, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to this. All right, here's the statement. We believe that as a visitor experience research effort, multi-institutional visitor experience research effort, we have a responsibility to be responsive to the ways in which the visitor experience will look different. This means adding questions about health and safety and changing some of the previous core questions, either because they no longer make sense or shouldn't take priority. The question to you is, does this reflect your thinking as well?
Can you paste that into the chat?
I can.
Thank you.
It's not.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I
I
won't
took some
publish it on the
liberties. You know,
website yet.
yeah, I riffed on the idea, but you get the idea. I promise no one will take it personally if you use offensive language like you are fools, since we came up with that language.
I'm truly appreciating your use of all caps. We're leveling up here with our question responses.
I'm going to give credit to Alex on this one. He claimed that these responses were cheeky, and I couldn't agree more. Okay, I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to respond if you haven't already. We've got 80% of participants have voted. Basically just looking, you know, for that pat on the back that I'm a genius or a fool, depending on how you think of me. You're not? Oh.
No.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, I am going to close it now. And, you know, hopefully our, you know, our personalities come before, and, you know, we are geniuses. But no, in reality, this has nothing to do with us, Alex, Sarah, Gabby, any of the core, or even the Leadership Advisory Committee, but really, hopefully just this idea that many people are thinking about different things we can and should be asking our audiences. However, again, I'm really excited to see that it's not 100% unanimous, and that there are some people who are disagreeing with taking this stance on you know, ways to adjust the core instrument, because this is exactly why we wanted to meet today. So I really appreciate everyone who participated in the polls. And now we're going to open it up to what we hope is a robust discussion, not a presentation, but really just a sharing of ideas. And so thinking about, sorry, is anyone, Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just briefly, Leanne put a question in the chat that I think is helpful to contextualize, and that's, if we do change some of the core questions, do you think we would return to the old wording at some point? And of course, like, nothing is ever for sure, but it seems like with the way that the situation, the COVID-19 situation anyway, is unfolding, is that eventually, somewhere down the line, things will probably return to some kind of normal again. Like, stay-at-home orders will be fully lifted, and we'll go back to everything in the museum being open, and can't really say exactly what timeline that'll be, but I fully expect that we would eventually go back to, if not the exact same COVES survey, something that's really similar to what we had before this all started happening. And if there are changes, it would be changes that we were going to make anyway, rethinking questions that need rethinking, that kind of thing. So I would expect that this is kind of a time-limited sort of situation.
Great question. And thank you for stopping me, Alex. And, you know, again, jump in with any comments, questions at any point. I know it's a little chaotic with 37 people, but we're thrilled that you're here. Thinking about that, and before even jumping on the chat, I want to pose this first question because many of you talked about how, you know, more than 50% thought the instrument could be shorter. And a lot of you were in alignment with this meeting the moment, adding questions about health and safety, or reframing some of the existing questions. And so posed to all of you, what types of comparisons in the data are you most interested in making to data you already have access to from pre-closure time?
This is not a poll. You can just.
Yeah, the floor is yours. Has anyone thought about making comparisons yet?
I'm wondering if we can seed it from any previous conversations and ideas that came up before.
Well, this is Josh, and I have bad Wi-Fi here, so I'm not showing video, but certainly demographic. Yeah, Kaylin just said demographics. That's a big one. Are the same kinds of folks coming.
And Jadana also said OER, so the overall experience rating. Definitely, I've heard that from a couple people.
Would you guys prefer audio responses or responses in the chat?
We haven't really set norms for the webinars, except that we always come together in the hopes that people will show their video. And because we're recording, it will make it easier for people watching later if they do hear audio. But we want you to do whatever is most comfortable for you right now.
And if you want, you can use the raising hand function in the chat if you're worried about kind of jumping and like talking over somebody else. So Ryan, are you able to see the raised hands? If you click on participants, you should, if someone clicks raise hand, you should be able to see it. Like I'll do it.
Okay, yes, Alex, the floor is yours.
Ryan, can you also just repeat the question you asked? I know it had something to do about comparisons, but I can't remember exactly what you were asking us to respond to.
Yeah, I'll post it in the chat again as well. But I'm curious about points of comparison people are interested in making in the data. And this will lead us to the understanding of what of our previous survey is most critical to keeping exactly the same, for all intents and purposes, as before, so we can compare data from pre-pandemic to reopening. I won't use the word normal, Chris. I know that's crazy. Nothing's normal.
Ryan, just to articulate from my perspective, the two things that I've heard are demographics and OER, and obviously Shadana and I have talked about this, so we have some agreement on this, but the reasoning for that, one is that OER as the overarching measure that has less complexity to it than Net Promoter Score. And so all of our worries about Net Promoter Score being a multiple measure, not only what was my experience, but who might I recommend that to? It's a double question. And so between the two big picture questions, I'd rather have the simpler one and would like to continue to be able to say, how is our experience? Even as our world has changed, what's the overall perception? That's incredibly important to us. The demographics is incredibly important because we all have multiple, sometimes grounded in data and sometimes grounded in who knows what, theories about who will be coming to museums and who the museums are working for. And so with those two pieces of data, I can do a great deal of work.
I love it. I love the explanation about OER over NPS too. That's really helpful for contextualizing this. But before you go totally on mute, I'm going to push a little bit on demographics. We have many demographics questions, and depending on the conversation I'm in, people have different areas of interest. I'm inclined to suggest that means all of the demographics, but I'm curious from this group especially, if you've thought about the areas or the demographic questions that you are ready, prepared to make comparisons against or are most interested in.
I think that for us, and I'll just keep going and then I'll be quiet for a nice long time, that we do have a ton of demographic questions. And so within those, I'm less interested in the full detail of group makeup. There's a lot of questions, and especially for a long group, that makes for a long survey. But if we can just get respondent race and ethnicity and gender and education and income, that those are ones that I'm going to be asking really hard questions about and want to be able to say, these are the most important things. I would like to keep all the demographics, but if I can't, and in particular, if you start to do gender and age for every person in your group, it adds a lot of questions to the survey, and that gets a little bit more flexible for me.
That's great.
I'll second everything Marjorie just said. I think it will still be useful for us to have the general group group type. Are they visiting with an adult only group, with children in their group, but not necessarily, is it so critical to have the group type stuff, the detail? The other thing I'll echo, someone Carla in the comments had posted some things about wanting to know what areas of the museum people are using, because I think that is still going to be of interest to us as flow patterns are different. Are they getting to places they didn't get to before? Are they not getting to places that they used to go to, et cetera? So I think that's going to still be important. I just saw somebody put up zip code. I agree with that one too, because I think we're all going to want to know how that local tourist thing shifts around as travel becomes less of a common thing in the near future. So yeah, I'm basically echoing stuff people said, but just sort of putting my rubber stamp on it.
This might be too big of a question, so you can tell me to scale it back, Sarah, Ryan, or Alex. But I'm wondering about how much of a visitor experience your organizations are anticipating changing. So, you know, for example, some organizations may be thinking a lot more in more complex ways around equity and accessibility than they were before. Some might not be, because it's just like, how do we get to reopening and being present? I'm wondering about, like, what kind of contexts are people thinking about all of this within? Are you going to be a whole new museum when you reopen? Like, are you using this as like that moment to become something different or more?
Hey, this is John Bordeaux from the Connecticut Science Center. I'm sorry I'm not on video, but I think, Sarah, you asked a really, really interesting question, because we've got two formative moments for us that we're looking at here, both from a COVID standpoint and from a diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism standpoint. The fact of the matter is that we do have to get open if we want to do any of the other stuff, which is important for us. We're slated to open on June 20th, and we think we're going to have about 20% of our exhibits in museum experience offline based on regulations because of interactives. And we're in turn ramping up live science, which we have to be very careful about how we talk about it, because if everyone uses the word performance, it gets shut down. You can't do a performance. So we have to be very careful about the language around it. One of the interesting things as we think about COVES, and we were talking about this just this morning in our management meeting, is trying to use the old data set and the new data set to try and determine, because we believe that a lot of our visitors are going to be return visitors, what their assessment is of what we've been able to do and deploy, and whether or not COVES will be able to provide any insight into that. You know, certainly from an overall experience standpoint, if someone says my overall experience 6 months ago was superior and now it's inferior, we're going to know a lot about what we have managed to deploy under the circumstances. So in some ways, we're looking at it not necessarily on a point-by-point basis, but trying to derive something more holistic from the data set that we garner as we reopen. And then as we move beyond that into issues of anti-racism, you know, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to use COVES and COVES data. I'll also say that we are doing a tremendous amount of training with our floor staff on both of these issues to try and determine on the first hand how visitors are using our facility differently, and for people to observe and do some qualitative observations and record those on how people are using our facility and whether or not they're using it differently. It may not reflect in a survey, but may reflect in habits that people don't even know that they're doing. And then as we move forward with issues in our exhibit facility and facilitated experience around anti-racism, you know, data will become that much more important. So from a data gathering standpoint, I'm not sure exactly how to lead this effort, but I think it's a pretty amazing moment for us to be able to look at the work that we're doing together.
Thanks, John. I know that Artis raised her hand. I think she would like to jump in.
Thanks, Ryan. I was in the middle of typing a long chat and about equity when it came up, so I decided this was probably easier. We've actually decided we're going to stay closed a lot longer, partially because we feel like we're a hands-on museum that has no space that people can just sort of be filed through to sort of conform with the regulations was going to be possible, but we've also really thought about it as an opportunity to kind of try and reinvent ourselves, to figure out how we can be not just a place that we think of ourselves as welcoming to a diverse audience, but a museum that really supports a lot of anti-racist ideals, and how do we get ourselves to that? So we recognize we can't really do that overnight or between now and July, and so we're going to try and stay closed longer so we can emerge differently as a different institution and perceive differently. So we're really interested in using the COVES data to help us figure out both like how we are successful at that, how we're perceived differently, if we're attracting different audiences. But we're also really looking at how we can be in different locations. So the Lawrence Hall of Science is on the Berkeley campus, but we're up on the hill, and it's really difficult to get to us if you don't have private transportation, and even then you have to pay for parking. So we're thinking about how we go out more into the community to do things, and so trying to figure out like how we implement COVES in all, you know, all these different spaces when we're out in libraries and in parks and different ways, because we think that's where we're actually going to see the impact on our new equity forward stance, and less so on our physical space. So that's just something that we're sort of struggling with right now. But it also like raises this question of how do we, you know, how can we make comparisons if we're closed for a really extended period of time and only out in different locations? So that's something that we're also thinking about and struggling with when we think about our comparisons from before till now.
So great. I just want to respond to Josh's comment in the chat. We would also want individual gender and ages for all visitors. So I think now we're saying not individual, but the group demographics, gender and ages. If we lost that, wouldn't we lose all info about ages and genders of children? So that's a really good question. There does seem to be a little bit of a split between getting information from the survey respondent and then the rest of the demographics from the group. So that is worth thinking about as far as what we gain and what we lose, how much we strip away or what we're able to make comparisons for. It seems to me that, and this was mentioned, and I don't know if it was Elisa or in the chat, but that some kind of group composition piece is important. If it's adult only, if it's groups with kids, maybe it's how many kids, or, you know, select the age buckets of kids just to show the proportionality of those ages. So maybe we can reframe that and still make comparisons without losing too much. Okay, great. Well, this is still open for discussion, you know, thinking about the types of comparisons or the data that are most important. But there is a second question that we'd like to pose to you. And this is the pretty obvious one. It's just started coming up as anti-racism and equity and inclusion have come up. What new questions are you most interested in asking visitors when they return?
I'm interested in asking them about how they're interacting, how they're choosing to interact in the museum more than what they're choosing to interact with. So are they choosing to click on interactive videos? Are they kind of standing back and watching things? Are they doing something really physical? Are they sticking with their own group? Are they watching a show? I think it's just how they're experiencing it, instead of, because that may really change depending on people's comfort levels, and it might help us think about what experiences we want to design or support. And I don't think I'm getting all of the variables that I had thought about earlier, but I'll just throw that out there and I'm sure we can talk about it.
I was going to say, one of the things I'm interested in, and sorry if there's an echo, I had to move rooms, is we've done a big push like for online, and how successful has that been? Have people even heard about it? Things like that would be interesting to find out.
So I'll say for us, so we are also, like John, opening on the 20th, so coming up fast. And so we've had some very pragmatic questions from our team about the experience in terms of, do people feel safe? Do people feel that things are being cleaned appropriately? You know, are all the different measures that have been put into place to help with social distancing and flow and things like that, is that helping people to feel safe in their experience, or just basically how are they feeling with that experience? And then related has to do with the communication. So when people are planning their visit, you know, are they getting the right information to set the appropriate expectation for how their visit will be different than they're used to it being? You know, there's going to be one entrance. Our other entrance is going to be closed. Everyone's going to enter through that entrance, but they're going to be a different exit that they've never used as an exit. You know, things like that, that I imagine a lot of our places that are opening sooner are thinking about as well. So just helping, you know, how good a job are we doing at helping people prepare for the altered experience that coming to the institution will be, because there's also going to be things that are closed. For Discovery Room, for example, will be closed. So just that sort of like expectations and how the experience feels have been big questions I've been asked to address.
Yeah, like are they comfortable? And are other visitors making them uncomfortable? Are staff making them uncomfortable? Or is everybody doing everything that respects each other's bubbles and it's going smoothly without a hitch? Yeah, those are really good questions.
I just wanted to make the observation that if we don't ask about safety and mitigating factors, it's going to be asked through other methods or venues, right? And so I have a concern about that debilitating COVES, right? So efforts to find those things out from our guests are going to affect maybe those that are asking those questions, right? Like our staffing for COVES and our staffing for other questions that we might have. These things might enter into competition. So I wouldn't want that to happen. So I think that's just another reason to be in favor of some changes and including those questions in COVES.
I would just add to what Orlando just said, that I think if we don't ask those questions, people will be answering those questions through other questions. Like the OER will be picking up how safe people felt. And I think so. If we want to understand the OER, because safety is such a big issue on people's minds right now, it's better to just ask that question.
I think that is true if the questions are sequenced in such a way that you try to get that out of the way, right? That you capture that so it doesn't get caught up in OER. But since that hasn't been the case historically, right? Like, and all the experience ratings, I believe, show up after OER. You know, asking people to like rate the cleanliness of the bathrooms or the friendliness of staff and things like that probably have always been bundled into OER. And so a change like that is probably pretty meaningful to our ability to compare it to history.
Yeah, I'm also, excuse me, I'm also really aware of our ability to collect a representative sample. If people really feel unsafe, they're not going to stop and respond to somebody who says, hey, do you want to do this survey? So I'm trying to think about how we can collect this information more in the moment and on the fly through more qualitative ways, maybe in addition to in COVES. Just, yeah, my big questions have, like, we have so many questions right now, and I'm having a hard time parsing what should be in COVES and what should be collected through other means.
There's a really good question in the chat from Beth around visitors feeling welcome and a sense of belonging. John aptly responds that several institutions have a specific ratings question about visitors feeling welcomed or belonging at the institutions. But it is worth noting that Amy and SMM have put forth a separate study to kind of dig into this deeper. I don't want to say much more than that, except that it's an exciting proposition to see what we can learn and get a little bit deeper about what it means to feel welcomed or comfortable in a place, especially given many of the protests that have been going on recently. Still scanning some of the comments. Carla says that the team is interested in gathering information regarding visitor expectations for their visit and their learning experience. Carla, if you're willing to expand on that at all, it would be great. As we've discussed in some conversations previously, expectations and the learning experience are both pretty broad and can be complicated to ask, but I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit if you're willing.
Yeah, Brian, we met with our core team members like twice since this pandemic has started remotely, and then we haven't created a question yet, not either thinking there, but then some of the questions that they want to learn is like, well, like maybe labs will be reopening in OMSI, for example, and then they're thinking like, we're gonna limit the number of groups. They may be like a group of only 4 people who are gonna be interacted with an educator. So we want to learn if we met their expectations in this current context, for example, and how comfortable they also felt with this interaction. And then we have a question regarding visitors' interactions with educators, because we want to also know about that. And then we're going to be doing a reporting this month for last fiscal year. And that's going to help us to see in the new context too. But that's assuming that we are not going to tweak that question, but we may tweak that question actually. And then other thing that I'm interested from this meeting in learning is about the data collection approach, for example, because it all depends. And then we are brainstorming questions, and I'm finding that this is a rich opportunity for me personally. However, like, how do you say? It will all also depends of how we collect the data. So I'm curious to also see if we're gonna solve these along lines, because our museum is gonna be open at the end of June or first weeks of July. So it's coming soon for us.
So that's great. I think there's a lot of agreement in the chat that the methodology will affect our ability to ask some of these questions. Certainly responds to Jessica's comment about the representativeness of the sample, or at least the randomness of the sample. And who's choosing to respond. And in a previous conversation from last week, I know we discussed this possibility that our sample of visitors when we reopen is probably going to be skewed anyway about people who feel comfortable coming back and their perceptions of safety and health and a whole lot of other things. And it's going to be challenging for us to unpack that. But at the very least, we can monitor it over time as time goes on, and presumably environments shift in any of our geographies. I will admit, from a COVES perspective, Alex, Sarah, please jump in, or anybody from the LAC who's been on some of these calls. It's quite challenging to think through all of this for everybody, right? We all have a context that's kind of unique to us, which is why we led with some of those questions. And we're trying to give people the flexibility to collect data in a couple of different ways, knowing that we can't dictate it. And because of that, we're going to have to be careful with the way we interpret data based on those data collection methods. We know some of you are open or are opening like imminently, and July 1st is kind of the time point, Orlando, that we are trying to have like our support system up and ready in terms of any changes that we're planning on making, knowing that that is reasonably possible given where we are right now and where many people expect to be in the coming weeks and months. So that's why we're trying to have as many of these conversations as possible right now. But we know that we know it's hard, and whether it's in person or thinking about who's responding and all that, it's going to be quite challenging. So again, we are trying to provide flexibility in a lot of this to make sure that you all have information to support your decisions, and to respond directly to what Brett was saying and Orlando as well about the health and safety aspects of this. If we don't collect it on the COVE survey, there are bound to be other places that do, and people who need the information, and likely people who need the information really, really fast. So we are trying to be responsive to that as well, because as kind of we've colored our whole conversation, if people don't feel safe, they're unlikely to stay long, they're unlikely to interact with a data collector, they're unlikely to return. And so that, in my mind, needs to be one of the biggest concerns that we're able to implement in our data collection and provide to our institutions. So I just talked for too long.
And in case it helps, people with imminent questions, I feel like where most of our conversations, including in last month's webinar, we talked a little bit more about data collection, and so something that Julie put in the chat was modified on-site protocol with options to take on your own phone with a link and QR code, or on an institution like our iPad that is sitting over on a stand or on a table. That will almost certainly be that will be an option that we will have guidelines for. But the webinar last month kind of showed me more that we need to also be thinking about like email surveys for COVES for people who are just going to have little or no staff capacity on the floor. So we'll be kind of building in some kind of option for that, right? Some kind of guideline if that's the only thing that your institution is able to do, or if you maybe want to do some kind of a hybrid, right? Like if collecting both, but that's all to say we won't be putting them together most likely. We would never, the pilot study back in 2000, not in 20, I don't know, when was that, 13, 14, 15, showed us that there's a lot of differences between these methodologies. So we would probably keep those data separate. Just as an idea of where our current thinking is. And I did want to share one more thing in the chat, which was that Beth made this really cool data collection brainstorming document and shared it last week on the COVES COP. So if you didn't see it, I'll just post it there. It's like if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, she's laid out a bunch of different options. You might resonate with some of them, you might not resonate with others. Definitely take a look at it and share some thoughts if you'd like to. So thanks, Beth. That was a really cool thing.
And speaking of comments, oh, go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I'll just say it's, some of my ideas, Jessica's contributed a lot. It's really just a little bit of word vomit with a little more thoughtful approach than that. So I've just been writing down everything from every webinar and chat and whatever. And so it just started just for me. But I really appreciate it. Feel free to just jump in. You don't need to suggest edits. And I'm curious to see how that goes along. And if you end up trying any of those things, please let us know. But share with whoever.
And your earlier chat was also really helpful. Keep in mind that for those of you that do offer comment cards, you are bound to pick up some of those more extreme responses, both positive and negative. People are still going to be apt to give you feedback where you truly stand out and where you truly fail them. I would argue, obviously that's not representative and we know all the ins and outs of that, but I would also argue that the mode in which you collect those is going to be important as well. Visitor concerns over paper and pencil on site. If you offer simply an electronic comment card through a QR code or anything else. So keep all of those options open because all of those will be important in getting the visitor feedback. But Kelly posts a really interesting comment. And I'm curious, and maybe we can do this through a digital show of hands in your reactions or thumbs up. How many of you are planning on doing a visitor health screening or survey before visitors will be allowed in the building, if you know? All right, Megan raised her hand.
Raise hand or thumbs up.
Yeah, maybe not a ton. Jessica, Beth.
Can you make it a poll, Ryan?
I could. That'd probably be more work than like the 4 hands that I see right now, unless I'm missing something. So that's really interesting.
I think the question is around like, what is a screening? Like people have to acknowledge something, but they aren't required to like take an additional survey. And those are different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like even a temperature check. But like, I think the suggestion here is that if visitors feel like they've already done something like a survey prior to entering, and then their willingness to do something afterwards needs to be taken into account, especially if they feel like it's duplicative information. So keeping in mind that health and safety doesn't mean, how did you feel before you entered the building, but how did your experience make you feel? So I still think that it's about the experience there and what we're doing to create a safe and healthy environment for visitors when they arrive. Oh, sorry. I'm just now seeing that everyone is asking me to make it a poll and trying to count also.
I was trying to just read that out to you so you wouldn't have to get distracted by the chat.
Yeah, lots going on.
Do you want me to share any of the ideas that for new questions that we've kind of bounced around so far?
Sure.
They're not
do
like
that.
It's not like draft questions. It's just ideas of things we've thought about asking about within either the leadership council or the questions and measures team. So I'll just try to, I don't know, I'll screen share it so that, oh no, I can't screen share. Never mind.
Oh no, I can. We can do that.
It's just so I'll have it's like 4 ideas, but just so we have them kind of up, and you don't have to try to hold them in your head as I read them. So I'll just put it up. Okay, so one, and this could encompass a lot of things, this gap analysis. So Ryan was the one who kind of brought this up in our questions and measures call, but that would be kind of 2 points. So there's how important were different kind of health, safety, et cetera, like kind of risk mitigation things. How important are those things to you? And then how available were they at the museum? So like, how important is it to you to be seeing staff members all wearing face masks, or to be seeing visible cleaning of the exhibits, or like signage or communication? So this could be any number of things. And then, how available was it? So like if it was important and not available, that is a huge issue for that visitor. So we would kind of analyze the gap in between those 2 things. Another idea that Josh had shared on the questions and measures call was, what is a visitor perception of the museum's content response to everything that's happening in the world right now? So that it could just be COVID-19, but it could definitely also be like the protests and police brutality and that more recent events there. Another thing that I heard a couple people mentioning just now as we were talking about it is kind of the emotional experience during the visit, which could include something like feeling of welcoming or belonging. From a safety perspective, it could be like, did you feel safe enough during this visit that you could relax and have fun, or were you so tense because there weren't enough safety measures taken that you didn't feel like you could have a good time? And then it's possible there could be something even more detailed around hands-on interactives. I know that's such a big issue for a lot of us. Not very defined, but does that need to be more detailed? So those were 4 ideas that we had come up with, but I'm hearing more ideas from all of you right now. So if anyone has reactions to those, please share.
I've got a question based on some of what came out earlier. This idea of figuring out what visitors are using in the museum. How many of you, and maybe I could probably set up a poll, but I'm curious about how many of our spaces are going to look different, right? Those lists that we had before and the ones that we might implement after opening. I mean, even if I say that the space X, that's not SpaceX, but like place B is open, will it be the same as place B was before? And how we track that and interpret it in terms of visitor patterns for going through. Yeah, the see-do list is going to change. And that's kind of what I think as well. And I wonder how critical, so for all of you on the call, I wonder how critical that is.
For us, moving, like how people move through our space and where they go definitely is a huge question. But I don't think that we've thought about this in terms of capturing it with COVES. Just because like even within a space, yeah, some of our exhibits are going to be off the floor, or our theater is now going to be used for something completely different. So that's a big question for us, but I don't know how we would capture that with COVES, just because it is a big, we don't have a huge space, but having to remember at the end of your visit all the places you went and all of that is difficult for folks.
Yeah, so Kaylin, just to reframe my question, maybe not repeat it, but reframe it. As we've thought about ways that we think about the hands-on interactive pieces for many of our museums, I think there's this worry that, we'll have to shift dramatically because of what health and safety precautions we're taking. And because of that, some of our exhibit components might be off the floor, spaced out, closed entirely. And so the question to everyone was, how is your museum experience going to be different or look and feel different for visitors when we reopen? And what does that mean about the instrument as far as capturing what visitors see or do when they return? And so I was curious about what people are doing at their own institutions.
Brian, in our museum, our core team members mentioned that because some things are going to be closed and others open, they want to gauge the interest of visitors. What are they looking forward as we are reopening, for example, to prioritize? And is there an opportunity to ask that in this survey, or we have to think about other mechanisms? But we haven't thought about where do visitors go, because that's an internal decision, I guess, and then it's going to be very limited initially.
Yeah. And I mean, I think some of the comments that are coming up right now are reminding us that many of these decisions are out of our control. Not like my personal control, but like the museum's control entirely. There might be forced restriction on how many people are allowed in the building, or flow, or, any of those things, masks being one of the most obvious in terms of local guidance or enforcement. So again, we're trying to think through some of the questions that will provide information for decision making, right? The ability to act on stuff rather than just, oh yeah, we should ask this, or that's nice to have. Going back to that poll question, does this need to be a shorter survey than before, or the same length, or are we adding on to what we already have? So, easy conversations to have.
Megan, do you have your hand? Megan has her hand up. I don't know if it was a holdover. Oh, maybe it was just a holdover. Just checking and make sure, Megan.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
That's okay.
Just in regards to, I guess, what you were just discussing, I think for us, it almost becomes, because we're looking at a situation where at least half of our museum is likely to be closed for an extended period of time, and those places that will be closed within the museum are the fan favorites. And they're the things that connect people to the space and that really bring people back time and time again. So I think we're looking at it more in the context of how it changes both the learning experience, but also changes their personal connection to the museum when they just don't have access to those spaces.
From the very small museum perspective, this is Rachel from the Utility Exploration Center. So our exhibit floor is 3,200 square feet. I've been calculating permissible bodies on the floor, and I think I'm at about 15. I'm taking all the speed bumps out, so all of the hands-on interactives on the short time. We're aiming for opening sometime in July. I expect visitors may clear there in 5 minutes. So that means the survey will not be useful for me because it's no use trying to collect data. I can see, and I actually, as a small museum, the burden on us of trying to collect the data, it gets to be fairly large. So I was actually thinking of suggesting to you that we go to like a quarterly baseline. I still think all the questions are very valuable, and I think while we're grappling with the current moment, we should think about the long arc of the data that we're collecting. And so I still want to be able to keep a lot of that core stuff the same over time. But giving visitors the option to continue to give us information through phones or through online surveys, I think will be important. We're shifting on the short term to pretty much a virtual experience. We're not relying on gates, so it's easier for us to make some of these decisions. So we're trying to provide more things that people can do from home. And so being able to test that and understand that virtual experience is going to be critical for us. And I know you're working on that in addition, but that would be a piece where we'd be really very interested to participate in some larger kind of survey experience.
At the museum, we're going to overcome interactives through a shift. So we're planning for a 2-hour shift for guests, and then closing for a sanitizing and cleaning process. And then children's props There's some limitations on that, but all props will be switched out. So we're going with less props on the floor, but a complete and full switch out after every one of these shifts. So that's how we're going to overcome. So I'm suspecting that we won't have guests with issues about interactivity or about interactive exhibits, but I could envision them having issues with the timing. And I could see challenges about collecting COVES because everybody's going to be leaving at the same time. So I could see that being maybe a condition that hinders our collectionability. And then I could see people responding to COVES adversely considering the times. But we need to know that if we are going to change that or modify it anyway. So.
Thanks for that, Orlando. Those are really good suggestions for, as you noted, kind of navigating the difficulty with interactives in high touch spaces. We've got about 3.5 minutes left. I want to open the floor for any general comments about your reopening efforts or the ways that you see COVES fitting into this. But I do want to acknowledge particularly Orlando and Rachel's, most recent 2 comments about how context plays so much of a role and how challenging data collection will be in the short term. And also acknowledging that I think many of us, if not all of us, have been having a lot of other conversations specific to what Sarah brought up earlier around changing our museum practices moving forward towards anti-racism and thinking about a lot of the strategies that we've been more hopeful about before, but making them a priority. And so I recognize that we are all doing a ton of work to make our museum experiences great for everybody. So just, yeah, I guess that's my.
A really quick logistical thing, if we're letting people use their own devices, then the intro page would have to change, because the first page of the survey, the instructions for the data collector, right? And the script, and you have to,
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Beth. Can you get closer to your microphone or something?
Sorry, we got 2 Zoom meetings in my house. Preschool's upstairs. If we do let people use their own devices, the intro page needs to change because the intro page is for data collectors.
Yeah, so what Beth is saying is that if people are scanning a QR code or doing it on their own device, the intro page needs to change. The smaller COVES team has been aware of that. We're working on separating the data collection response piece from the visitor survey to enable QR codes or some kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, well, this as always, this is awesome. I mean, there have been so many good ideas, thoughts, and really, honest and open communication, which is what I love most about these webinars and the community of practice, because you're also willing to share your expertise, but also some of your fears. And I have been taking a lot of notes. I feel like Alex has too. Hopefully Sarah captured some of this because she does a better job of distilling it than I do, for sure. But I just want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday with us. Again, recognizing that we're all doing a lot and thinking about a lot. And so I appreciate each and every one of you. And if you have additional thoughts about this specific topic or anything else in ways that COVES can support your institutions when you reopen, please do just email us. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and end this call and this recording a whole minute early, 60 seconds back in your days. And we will post this to YouTube. So if you need to catch up on the conversation or recommend it to others, that you can. Okay. Thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.